Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 133.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Today I'm with David Witkowski. How did I do on your last name there, David?
It's fine. Witkowski, yes. Thanks for having me.
It's got like double consonants right in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's a Polish thing. So they like to make it challenging.
Yeah, I was in Poland a while ago and noticed that there was very few vowels in their street signs.
That's an Eastern European thing, I think. They love their consonants.
And it works well for them. Well, anyway, we've got you here on this podcast. We talk about all things Wi-Fi, wireless LAN related, and you've kind of been in this industry for a while. So I thought we'd start just by having you give us a little background about, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I've been in the wireless industry and telecommunications in general, essentially my entire career. Started out actually interested in wireless as a hobby as I was a teenager, and then went into the military and did wireless for the U.S. Coast Guard. And then after I got out, I worked primarily in land mobile radio. Started off in the early cellular industry, and then began working in wireless LAN. Spent some time at Apple in the late 80s, and so of course wireless LAN was just kind of being conceived around that time. And then I happened to be at University of California, so I went back and got my degree later in my life, and happened to be at University of California at Davis at the time when Wi-Fi was just being standardized. So got involved through a professor that I was working with, and they were trying to standardize, the 802.11 at the time. So sort of, it was a good timing for me. I think everything hit right around that time that I was in. So it was a very interesting time to be in school.
And to be part of it becoming what it is now, kind of the edge of most of our networks. Well, we have you on here because you do some consulting and have written some books and white papers on things of interest to our audience. So I thought we'd have you and get you to talk a little bit about some of the white papers that you've written lately, some of the things that have to do with Wi-Fi in a metro or citywide. You wrote a blueprint document. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what was its impetus, how did it get started, and where's it sitting right now?
So my company, Oku Solutions, has a set of clients, one of which is an organization in San Jose called Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And Joint Venture is a nonprofit that's been around since the early 90s. They have a series of things that they do, one of which is a wireless communications initiative, of which I serve as executive director. And through that work, we were asked to be part of the Global City Teams Challenge. And that was a NIST NTIA US Ignite project, which they had a public Wi-Fi. They wanted to form a public Wi-Fi supercluster. And so these superclusters are kind of interesting because in a way they sort of are doing what Joint Venture has been doing for a couple decades now, which is bringing together industry, academia, the governments, and kind of working together towards a common goal. So I was nominated to head up this group. Of course, I wasn't in the room at the time when I got nominated, which is the way it always happens. But I took the group through a one-year exercise of essentially looking at public Wi-Fi, and we did a series of surveys and case studies. We interviewed a lot of cities that were doing public Wi-Fi, and through that we pulled together the public Wi-Fi blueprint, which was published in July last year and was taken out at the GCTC Expo in Washington, D.C. in early August of 2017. And since then, it's been quite interesting to see the outgrowth of that document. The state of Virginia, for example, had chosen to adopt the supercluster blueprints as part of their smart city efforts. And we were also told that the country of Singapore has adopted the blueprints into their planning as well. So it's been gratifying to see that the document had a positive result, and that we're getting visibility not only in the U.S. but even internationally.
So as you went through that research, I'm sure you covered both the technical side and the more political or the business model side. Um, can you kind of recap that? And I'm sure, it's a year's worth of effort, and I'm asking you to put it in just a couple of minutes. But what was both, if you can answer both those questions on the technical side, what's the recommendation of technically how to make it work, and on the political or business model side, what kind of business models have you found that would work for that public side of the Wi-Fi?
Yeah, so we looked at the technical aspects of it. We also looked at the economics and the public policy as well. We looked at the socioeconomics of it as in the sense of what value or what niche does this fill in terms of providing service. For example, digital inclusion. Dealing with addressing the broadband gap, people that don't have connectivity. There were a number of different profiles which were included, and of course the document is free to download from the NIST website, and maybe you could provide your readers a link for that. But we
will add that to the show notes.
And then the value of it was really to sort of ask the question, in which cases does this work? Certainly we as an industry have been looking at public Wi-Fi for many years. For the veterans in the audience, public Wi-Fi was something we were talking about over 10 years ago. And there was that period of time when municipal Wi-Fi was a big buzz, and everybody was talking about, for example, covering San Francisco with free Wi-Fi. And at one time, Google was going to do that, and then that didn't happen. And I think there were reasons why that didn't happen 10 years ago, and why today it seems to be a little bit more likely that these things will be successful. And I think that what we know and what we found in our analysis was primarily that the city has to be, in order for it to work, in order for it to be a viable thing, the city has to be an anchor tenant of the network. And what I mean by that is the city itself has got to derive value from the public Wi-Fi, or else there really isn't an economic case to use it. So let me give an example of that. The city of San Jose has smart parking meters in the downtown, so you can use an app to pay for your parking, and if you need to extend your parking, you can do it on your phone. And there are obviously a variety of ways that you could connect those meters to the network in order to create that online functionality. Some cities have smart parking meters and they use cellular. San Jose chose to use it Wi-Fi, and so they built a Wi-Fi network, and then the parking meters are using that network as a way of connecting to be the smart parking meters. So the city derives then value from that by not paying those cellular connectivity costs. Rather, they pay the cost up front of building the network, and then the connectivity is then essentially free. So if a city can justify creating their own network to reduce their costs, then they can avoid this notion of trying to figure out, well, how does the system pay for itself? Well, if you can come up with a set of use cases, then the system will pay for itself just by virtue of the cost savings.
So what are some of the other cost savings that cities might see? Police, fire, whatever. What are the other things that you found?
Yeah, certainly in the public safety is one that we've seen. For example, I worked with the county of Sonoma in Northern California a few years back on the county-wide Wi-Fi network that was put together by the sheriff's department. And so they used that because at the time there was no, 4G was still non-existent. Data plans were really expensive. And of course, now as we move into the world where FirstNet is starting to become a reality, and of course, we just had the states opted in to FirstNet within the last month. We've had that move forward. But until today, I'm sorry.
Well, you obviously started with LMR, so you want to explain to our audience what FirstNet is?
Yeah, so FirstNet is a public safety LTE network that was created by a congressional act in 2012. And what it does is it provides LTE bandwidth specifically for public safety, first responders, people that are dealing with emergencies. And there was an RFP. AT&T won the RFP. Then the states had a period of time to choose to opt out or not, and all states, as of the end of December, have opted in. So now AT&T is going to be building this nationwide public safety LTE network. But until we get there, there are still a lot of cases where police, fire, they need to be able to connect to download information. And they probably don't want to be doing that on their personal cell phones and hotspotting their phones, or maybe even they don't want to, they don't want to pay for a phone through the city budget. So having a Wi-Fi network can be another way that a city can offset costs by creating a hotspot that public safety can then use for their own purposes. So if you see a police car pull up in front of a library, for example, a lot of times they're there to borrow the Wi-Fi network, use that for their downloading of case files or photos, such.
Police are no different than a lot of us who do the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So just on an aside on that FirstNet, what's the how does it differ or augment normal LMR for public safety?
A lot of people have had this notion that FirstNet is going to essentially replace LMR. Having been in the LMR industry for early part of my career, I can tell you that I don't believe that incident commanders and fire chiefs are going to be willing to take their push-to-talk walkie-talkies off the air and go to an LMR-based solution or an LTE-based solution. There are many counties that haven't even gone to digital LMR. And so there are more modern technologies than the traditional FM walkie-talkies that have been used for 40 years. I believe that in the long run, FirstNet will remain a data service, and that when there are incidents occurring, incident commanders and fire chiefs, police chiefs, they still want that reliability of that old push-to-talk LMR walkie-talkie. And so I don't believe that we will see a death of LMR, but rather an extension of the toolkit that first responders have to communicate in the event of a disaster.
I have the same opinion. It's a nice augmentation, but I don't see it. I see voice still going over LMR, but data is not very efficient on LMR. So a good way to go forward. So back to a metro Wi-Fi. What did your study find from the technical side?
So I think a lot of cities cities certainly have the desire to keep up with the trends. The biggest challenge, of course, is that the standards are evolving. So if a city invested in an 802.11n network a few years ago, now the chief information officer of the city is going to ask the council to approve an expenditure to move to an 11AC technology, or they went to 11AC Wave 1 and now they want to potentially go to Wave 2. I think making that argument is a little challenging because the city council asked the question, well, what is the value of this network? And how are we seeing are we seeing return? And a lot of the return that we've described is, in terms of social good or providing broadband for perhaps for people who are homeless or people who are socially or economically disadvantaged and they don't have broadband at their home. It's very hard to quantify that. So I think you can come up with certain use cases where you can quantify it, as in we saved money by not having cellular backhaul for parking meters. But the larger value of these networks is hard to quantify. So I think cities are still struggling to see where the value will come in. One of the things that we've been doing is as part of the work that my company is doing, we have a grant from the U.S. Geological Survey, which is part of the Department of Interior, and we are working on earthquake scenario for the Silicon Valley. So every few years, the USGS produces an earthquake scenario where they hypothesize a quake on a certain fault, and then they look at the question of how will it impact the local economy, how will it impact transportation, people's lives, and then how do we prepare for these. The new scenario that's going to go out in April of 2018, of which I'm one of the authors of the scenario, is called Haywired, and it's a play on words of the Hayward fault. But it's the first earthquake scenario that's ever been done in the internet age. And so it actually looks at the question of what happens to telecom, what happens to networks. I often tell the story of how my daughter has a friend, my teenage daughter has a friend who she talks to all the time, but she doesn't know her friend's phone number. She only knows how to reach her on FaceTime. So she knows how to reach her via an app, but she doesn't actually know her friend's phone number. So in an emergency, she would potentially have trouble reaching her friend if the data networks were down. So we have a large population in the Bay Area that is highly dependent upon these new technologies. And are we ready for an internet age disaster? I think is really a question that's in a lot of people's minds.
I think a lot of adults fit in that category. I don't think I even know my own children's phone numbers.
And I've talked to young adults and professionals who were born after of course the Bay Area talks about everyone knows where they were in October of 1989 when the big Loma quake hit, and a lot of people would say, well, I wasn't even born yet. So there are people who have no experience with that, and we have a population that has not experienced a major disaster in their lifetime.
Did your study look at actual very specific locations? There's some fiber nexus that if went out would cause a major disruption. I know that I had a customer back east where they used 3 different ISPs for redundancy, and a truck happened to hit a building that happened to have all 3 of them going through the same building, and they lost everything.
It's true that there are concentrated internet exchange points. We did look at the ISP architecture for the Bay Area, and we did talk about that. We also talked about the fiber feeds that come in even from transatlantic cable. So, for example, the cables that go over to Japan and China land in a part of Northern California, and then they have to make their way down into the Bay Area. But there are certain buildings in the Bay Area that are highly vulnerable, and if those buildings were to be damaged in a major way, they would take out a significant amount of infrastructure. Probably what would occur would be that networks might continue to operate, but they would be prevented from talking to other networks. And so, for example, the federal network might wind up being isolated. So the federal government would continue to have their network, but they might not be able to talk to the quote unquote public internet. And so I think that those internet exchange points are significant vulnerabilities. But I'm encouraged by the knowledge that people who do this kind of work are aware of that. So we have had conversations with people who have said, okay, how do we get trucks into this building, or how do we get water reflowing to cool this building, because we have a lot of internet equipment in that particular building, and this is a criticality. So this has to be. So we did touch on that in the earthquake scenario that we just completed. Kind of pushing back to the Wi-Fi topic, one of the other things that we talk about is the value of public Wi-Fi in disaster response. So if you look at the disasters that occurred in 2017, the hurricanes, the wildfires in Northern California, the wildfires in Southern California, we know that many times Wi-Fi becomes a critical tool for disaster response, because it may be the thing that continues to work when nothing else works. As Puerto Rico showed, there were Puerto Rican citizens were going to San Juan Airport using their Wi-Fi because that's what they had. And so they had people were showing up at the airport just to use the public Wi-Fi.
Or I work with a group called ITDRC, itdrc.org if anyone wants to look up. And they go in and it's one of the fastest ways to help in a municipality recover. You can bring up, a satellite link and a little Wi-Fi hotspot and give back to the municipality communications that they had lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they did a lot of that at hurricanes as well.
Yeah, and certainly we see that occurring with, Cisco sends their Nerve truck in, for example, to these disaster centers or these disaster zones. And so there are mobile communications resources which are capable of being dropped in, and they bring in cows or, cells on wheels and to bring up connectivity. Also, one thing that we learned in Northern California is that people need to be able to charge their devices. So they had 300 something people showed up at a fairgrounds, and the Red Cross had cots and blankets and food and water and all that stuff. And everyone said, okay, great, my phone's dead. Where can I plug in? And the building that they were in was so old, it didn't have very many outlets in the room that they were in. And so they found that they didn't have enough charging capacity. They had to bring in plug strips. And, even people had forgotten they didn't have their cables or they didn't have their chargers. So I think the mission of the Red Cross is expanding a little bit at this point, that they now have to have, as part of their cots and blankets kit, they also need chargers and cable.
Well, it's adapting to the needs of the customer. So yeah, makes sense.
Right. And if you look at a major disaster, like, if we hypothesize a major earthquake in the Bay Area, you can think about how many people. I mean, the wildfires in Sonoma County are a small. The wildfires in Sonoma County are a small thing compared to what potentially can occur with a major quake on the East Bay Fault. And that fault runs directly under one of the most populated areas in the United States, in the Oakland-Berkeley area, where the housing density there is enormously high. And then imagine that all of those people lose their home. And then where are they going to go? How are they going to connect? How are they going to charge their devices? And you'd be talking about tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, who would potentially be offline for long periods of time. But we live in an internet age where being online is not only, it's not a convenience, it's a requirement. You can't do banking, you can't look for a job. What can you do if you're not online, right? And so I think that
the whole recovery process needs that.
It does, and that's exactly what the scenario was. And so one of the things we looked at was this question of, can public Wi-Fi potentially be a tool? So if cities are looking, so looping back around on the Wi-Fi topic, right? Cities have public Wi-Fi networks, so they're there hopefully to save the city some money. But they could also be used as disaster resiliency tools. In other words, we build this network thinking that hopefully we never need it, but if we do need it, we know that we can support large numbers of displaced people. And then we have to ask the question, are they secure, right? And if you're going to do banking on public Wi-Fi, is there a vulnerability there? And if we know there is, I wouldn't do banking on like a hotspot at a coffee shop, right? So how can you create a secure public Wi-Fi network that would allow people to conduct their daily lives in a secure manner and not have to risk having their identity stolen when they've just lost their house and half of the stuff that they own, and now they have to get their identity stolen. So we don't want to go down that road.
Well, there's a kind of a corollary. It's both alike and different. The digital divide, the difference in socioeconomic people, how they access the network, have the same need that displaced people would be after a disaster. And so if you can solve one of those, you get to solve the other one. But the difference between them is, and I found this in doing metro Wi-Fi in a variety of different places around the world, it's easy or easier to deliver Wi-Fi coverage at speed to the streets. We can use kiosks, we can use light poles, we can use all sorts of places to deliver it where the public go outside. But to deliver it inside someone's home is an entirely different step. And so the inside the home is what is needed for the digital divide. And yet for emergencies, people will go and queue up and stand anywhere to get their connection. and can solve that. So how did your document come up with a way to take those socioeconomic issues into effect and actually get it inside their domiciles?
So we didn't really talk about home Wi-Fi as because I think that occurs organically. I mean, certainly the major carriers are providing that. Xfinity has their home spots now where they're providing both your internal Wi-Fi as well as a public-facing SSID that can then be used. So we did talk about home spots and that movement towards having people's routers be a place for their neighbors to potentially get online if that was necessary. We didn't talk necessarily about increasing proliferation within the home because I think that's occurring on its own.
But that's my point was that's the those in the who under poverty or lower socioeconomic status.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So one of the benefits of a metro or a public Wi-Fi is to solve that. The kids want to come home and do their homework, but their parents can't afford Comcast.
Right. Yeah. So, and we do have that problem, right? We certainly. I mean, and the reality is we have that problem here in the Silicon Valley. I mean, people are stunned when I tell them that the city of San Jose has 90,000 people who don't have broadband in their home. I mean, in the capital of Silicon Valley, we don't have broadband in 90,000 of our residents' homes, and that to me is amazing. And people they think, wow, you're in Silicon Valley, you've got to have like the best networks on the planet. The reality is that in underserved areas, poor areas of the city, we don't. So I think that we're beginning to see the carriers are making. So the utilities, I should say, are making some aggressive moves towards doing that. I'm seeing a lot of movement towards increasing broadband penetration. We're starting to see a lot more DSL build out. Comcast has done the DOCSIS 3.1 upgrade, and hopefully that will begin to allow them to do more. But physically getting those wires strung is really part of the challenge. And one of the ways that the city of San Jose has helped to address this is Sprint granted the city of San Jose hotspots, which were pre-charged with Sprint service, which they gave out to high school students in these underserved areas. And so what they did was they essentially got free Sprint broadband, which was then create a Wi-Fi hotspot that they could use in their home. And it's ostensibly for the purpose of doing their homework and being able to, so
wow.
It was an expensive option, but it was better than what they had.
Expensive option for that.
So, I mean, but in the long run, we need to incentivize, these utilities to build in these areas that are underserved. And there's an economics question there. Of course, the California recently passed Assembly Bill 1665, which offers funding to carriers and utilities for the purposes of doing CAF2 build out. So I think with 1665 now the law in California, we will begin to see them using those funds to do expansion, and that was exactly what the bill was for, was to say, we need funding to be able to essentially subsidize the work that we're going to do in these lower income areas, because they, how many millions of dollars does it take to build a network, and then if the majority of the people in that neighborhood are on Lifeline service, you never really recoup that. So then you can socialize the costs by taking money from the wealthier subscribers, but at the end of the day, on paper it looks like a money money loss project, right?
Well, I like that you address that separately. That's separate and distinct and different than public Wi-Fi, because to deliver the technical side of delivering public Wi-Fi into people's homes is a huge challenge, whereas the carriers have a much better mechanism for getting it to where it needs to be.
So I think that public Wi-Fi, as you pointed out, is the street level technology. But really, what you need to do is you need to put those wires into people's homes, and that's a challenge, because that's expensive, right? And I've at one time had a business doing telephone lines for fax machines, so I'm dating myself by saying that, but. At one time I did
fax machines were these devices that you could.
I did a booming business putting in like second phone jacks for people. At one time I had a business that did fax and modem lines and it was making money hand over fist because everyone wanted them. But the reality is punching a wire through a wall and stringing it and doing all that stuff. It's dirty, time-consuming work, and it's hard to do in a mass fashion. And look at Google Fiber. Google Fiber had all these grand plans that they were going to run fiber to everybody in the city of San Jose or wherever, and it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because why? Because even Google, an extremely wealthy company, didn't have the resources to do this in a cost-effective manner,
or to at least see the business model panning out in the end.
I agree. Yes. Yeah. So it's all at the end of the day, it all comes down to business models. So how do you do that? You do it with public policy. You do it with tax offsets. You do it with rate reductions or rate increases. But at the end of the day, it has to get paid for.
Well, great. Well, David, thank you for your time today. It was enjoyable talking to you. I'd like seeing the point of view from more of the public policy side. If anyone wants to read any more of your things, where can they track you down on Twitter or your website?
Yeah. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am my amateur radio call sign, which is W6DTW, W6 Delta Tango Whiskey. You can find us on okusolutions.com is our company. And if you want to follow what we're doing in the nonprofit space, then that would be jointventure.org/wireless.
On that amateur radio side, I saw on your client list Elcraft. I'm a KX3 user, and so it was like, whoa, yeah, I know those guys.
Yeah, I know Eric, and they come to our field day. Wayne comes to our field day, so we usually at our field day we get a preview of what Elcraft is going to come out with. So I saw the KX3 2 years before it hit the market,
and probably the X2 ahead of everyone else as well.
Yeah, and so Wayne always, he's kind of a joke. Wayne shows up and he's wearing like a long trench coat, and he sort of is like, okay, and he opens his trench coat and he's got something inside, and everyone stands around, they ooh and they ah about it. So yeah,
sounds like a fun event.
It is.
Well, thanks again for your time, and we'll send people to your website and put those links in the show notes.
Thanks very much.
Wireless LAN blog reviews with Glenn Cate.
Well, Glenn, welcome back. What's the Wi-Fi blog review today?
Hey, well, thank you, Matthew. There are just one word that describes this blog site, and that is fun. And you will laugh your head off when you get to see some of the crazy and stupid ways people actually deploy access points. And Matthew, you're laughing, and I know some people already know what website I'm going to. I am going to Badfi by Eddie Forero. You can find his website at badfi.com, BADFI.com. And be sure to follow Eddie on Twitter at HeyEddie. And he also has another Twitter handle at Badfi Show. Just a little bit about Eddie. A lot of you know about Eddie already. He has his own VAR in Colorado called Communica One and is CWNE number 160. Eddie has a lot of Aruba experience and is Aruba certified ACCP and ACMX number 365. I know if any of you have any Aruba questions out there, you can hit up Eddie. He'd be glad to help you out. Oh, and Eddie plays guitar. He and his wife sing at an open mic event at their area. Yeah, and you can check it. He's got a recording session called on SoundCloud, and you can see that on his About page. So Matthew, okay, the first very page I pull up on Badfi, okay, you're gonna die laughing. It is a picture of someone who put a sheetrock tube through an Ubiquiti AP and mounted it to a sheet of plywood. I am not kidding. Now, Eddie doesn't tell us if that AP actually worked or not, but he did put the picture up there. So you've got to check it out. And yep, that's pretty much what you'll find on Badfi. People who have installed APs poorly, improperly, stupidly, or just add your own adverb, okay? But you will be scratching your head along with me asking the same question. What were they thinking? But that is exactly why Eddie started this website. It does make us think why these pictures do not show good ways to mount APs. So let me read you a quote from Eddie's page, why he started Badfi. Badfi began to highlight some of the wrong ways that Wi-Fi has been deployed with the hope that, through the funny, It would serve to teach people about properly deploying wireless networks and prevent future bad Fi. Not simply posting pictures of poor installs, but to educate about why it's wrong and what can be done to fix it.
That's good.
And, that's exactly what Eddie does. He teaches about how to do good Wi-Fi through showing us pictures of bad Wi-Fi. And, Matthew, it works. Now, what I really like about this blog, so I'm just looking at pictures on his site. He has a picture of an Aruba AP mounted inside of a steel metal box.
Yes, I've seen that.
Have you ever heard of RF attenuation? Yep. Well, that's what they show. He's got one mounted up under some metal drainage tubes. Okay, now this you'll die laughing. He has an AP completely covered in aluminum foil. No, you got to check it out. You say, well, who put that up? I don't know, but he's got a picture of one. He's got one. It's got 3 patch antennas and 3 dipoles attached to the same AP. Nice. He's got a picture of a Linksys AP fed zip tied to the top of a church window. I'm sure that worked, but the aesthetics are horrible. Then he's got a picture of APs that they mounted outside for exterior use and to make them, comparable for the outdoors. What he did, he put plastic bags and they poked the dipole antennas through them. So there's the picture list goes on and on. But Eddie has some other areas too, just on bad pictures, by the way. He's got a tab called The Blog, where he has done some of his own Wi-Fi research. The Roles, where he lists some of his favorite Wi-Fi blog roles and podcast roles. And then everything else where, you can get your own link and get your very own bad Fi sticker for your laptop. Sweet. So you can do that.
Anything else we don't want to miss?
Well, he's just got some great stuff on his website, but Eddie has put together a list called the Tool Roll, where he has listed his favorite design and planning tools, performance testing tools, packet capture tools, mobile tools, and miscellaneous survey tools. So he's put together a great list of tools I really think every land professional should know about. So be sure to check out his tool roll as well. Thanks, Eddie, so much for what you're doing to teach us about what we've all been asking for. There's a forum to list all the wrong ways Wi-Fi is deployed to teach us the right way to do it. So keep the pictures coming into Eddie, and Eddie, keep posting them, because laughter and fun is exactly what we need after a hard day of site survey.
Exactly.
So be sure to check out Eddie's blog at badfi.com and follow Eddie at Hey Eddie on Twitter.
Well, thanks, Glenn. That was a great review. Where can people follow you?
Well, my Twitter handle is at grcate. I'm on LinkedIn, and my Wi-Fi blog site is gcatewifi.wordpress.com.
Great. This is Matthew.
And this is Glenn, reminding all of you WLAN professionals out there to keep on blogging in the free world. Bye for now.
10 Talks.
Hi everyone, my name is Francois Verges. So I'm from France and I live in Ontario, Canada. And so I started my business about 3 years ago. It's called Senfio Networks, and I work as an independent Wi-Fi consultant. So today it's more going to be a business talk, sharing a little bit my experience, and starting a business in the industry and working as an independent consultant. So in our industry, we call ourselves independent consultant, but it has other denomination in other industries: freelancers, contractors, self-employed. But essentially, it all comes up to one individual providing professional services, right? So some stats to start today's trend. This association called Freelancer Union in the US, they did a survey in 2014, and they found out that 53 million Americans were doing freelancer work. So that's 1/3 of the population. And by 2020, 40 to 50% of the workforce is expected to be a freelancer. And so the freelancer economy is not only thriving in the US, it's the same thing that we see in Europe, Asia. And important statistic is that the millennials make a big portion of these freelancers. So this makes me think that the trend is going to continue. And I'm not the only one to believe so. 77% of the freelancers say that the best days of the freelance job market are yet to come. All right, so let's go back to our industry. And this is how I see it. We have two different profiles of independent Wi-Fi consultant, and I call it the safe profile and the flexible profile. Safe profile would be long-term contracts with a few clients. So basically it would be a consultant working like full-time hours for one dedicated client, and would have like a 6 months, 1 year contract, and then would renew the contract or would just go and work for someone else. So the advantage I see with this profile is that you get consistent revenue. And the disadvantage is that you get fewer customers. So if you're looking at grow your business, it might not be the objective, right? But if you're looking at growing your business, it might be a disadvantage. It's a little less flexible since you're dedicating all of your time to one specific client. It might be less flexible. And also, when you finish a contract and you get back out on the market, it might be difficult because you've been out of the market for so long. Sometimes it gets hard to get on the next contract. And then we have the flexible profile. So it would be the contrary, shorter contracts, but more clients, more customers. So the disadvantage is that the revenue can be inconsistent. If 1 month you don't have much work and then the next month you have more work, the revenue is going to fluctuate. But the advantage is that you have more customers, so increase the value of your business, and it's easier to grow your business later on if you need to hire people and if that's your objective. And it's also more flexible. You can manage your time better, and you get to work with different clients from different verticals, so it also makes it more interesting. So I've chosen the flexible profile for my company. Like I said, I don't think one is better than the other. It just meets different needs. So the basics when you want to start a business, what is the main goal of a business? Make money, right? If you don't make money, you die. So now, how do we make sure that we start good, the beginning? So work on a business plan. If you're like me and you have no business background really, you can start with a book named Business Model Generation, and they give you a canvas that helps you to define your business plan. So with that, you can find out, you can define who your customer is going to be, what resources you will need, things like that to get started. After that, you can perform a market study and study the competition. Look out for public services for that, because I was able to get a free market study from the province of Ontario to start with, and they gave me a list of business and partners in my city, and then they gave me like democratic stats about my city as well, all for free. So look out for free resources too for yourself. And then after that, choose a name. It sounds like it's an easy step, but it's not an easy step. And when you choose your name, make sure that the domain name is also available and buy it for yourself. And after that, you're all good to go. You can register your business. When you register your business, you get your tax number, and you can use your tax number to bill your customers and start making money. All right, so I like to compare the way business works to the way a network protocol works. So for a network protocol, we have the payload, which is the good stuff, and then we have the header, which is needed for the protocol to operate properly. And in a business, in terms of how you use your time, you have the billable hours, so the good stuff, and then you have the time you spend to, like all the admin work and the overhead that's needed for the business to operate, but you're not getting any revenue out of it. So just like a network protocol, the less overhead you have, the more efficient you become, your business becomes. So at the beginning, you might have a business this efficient, a lot of overhead. Some of the businesses are like this when they start, which is okay, right? But the idea is to slowly evolve into having a business this efficient. So you want to be spending a large portion of your time working on billable work. And then obviously you're still going to have a little bit of overhead for the admin work and for whatever you want to do to develop your business. So before I talk about developing the business, I'm going to talk about the different type of customer you can expect to have working as an independent consultant. So I see three, according to my experience: recruiting agencies, VAR, service provider integrators, and the final clients. So let's say you have a contract with a recruiting agency. Usually how it goes is that they have a contract with the VAR, and then the VAR has the contract with the client, and then you provide the services. And in terms of money flow, the final client pays the VAR pays the recruiting agency, and the recruiting agency pays you. Right? So a lot of people to feed, I guess. Same concept. I'm going to go fast on this one. So from a business standpoint, this model is the best because you get basically it has more potential to become long-term relationships, right? If you have your final clients, if you do a good job, they're going to come back to you for other jobs, right? But it's not always easy to go straight to the final clients. That's why sometimes you go through VARs or through recruiting agency for bigger companies. So to develop your business, you can develop business tools. So they're going to help you to be more efficient in the way you do all the admin work, right? So I've developed a couple myself. One tool to estimate the number of hours needed to do a validation survey. Sometimes I often get the questions like, how long would it take to do a validation survey for X amount of square foot? So I developed a spreadsheet that, according to the environment, I can come up with a number of hours on site, number of hours off site, and get a number quickly. Second one is a template that I use to provide quotes and statement of work for a personalized training session, something we can start from. And the third one is still work in progress, but I want to get the list of different requirement questions per vertical for like first contact. When you're on the phone with a customer and you're trying to grasp what they want to do, I think it would be handy to have a list of questions I can ask in order to build the business relationship. Branding. Branding is important. So you own a business, so the company's branding is important. So stuff like website marketing, charity, volunteering, and also since you the main guy in the business, your branding is also important. So training, certifications, blog, social media. I've actually got business through my blog and through Twitter, so that's important. And I put updated resume here because it's always good to have an updated version of your resume. So if someone's asking for it, you can send it quickly and it looks good on you. And then finally, education. So educate yourself on Wi-Fi. It overlaps a little bit with Manon's talk, so. But it's important, right? So if you educate yourself, you can better educate your customers. So you're going to provide the service, and on top of the service, you can share your knowledge, give tips, and they always appreciate that. And you can educate yourself on other topics. So I like audiobooks. I put out some that I liked, and I also like watching TED Talks. So a little inspiration slide to finish. It actually comes from one book from John Maxwell that's called I forgot the name now that I'm on stage. But basically the idea is that you want to set your goals high, you want to dream big, and even if you don't reach your goal, at the end of the day you would have achieved more than if you set yourself low. That's it for me. Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @WirelessLANPros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter @KeithRParsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.